But did you notice, once the seed began to sprout, did you notice what it formed? Did anyone see it? Roots. And the roots formed a shape. Someone said over there, yeah, it formed the shape of a cross. I always think it's so interesting. We see the mark of our Creator all throughout creation. It's just an incredible thing. But that's it. That's it. I mean, it's nothing too spectacular, but for whatever reason, this is the imagery that Paul wants to bring his audience's attention to. You know, this very complex thing that we're going to talk about, it's kind of hard to make sense of. We can begin to make sense of it by looking to the seed that sprouts. Now, I'm going to admit that that is not a perfect image. There's only so far that we can take that image before it breaks down. But I think Paul is trying to make a point, and the point that I think he's trying to make is that our death will not give way to nothingness. I've said that already. I want to say it again. It's something that I need for you to absorb, to take in, and to know as truth. Our death does not give way to nothingness, but quite the opposite. It's through our death that we will be raised to a newness of life. And what Paul wants to make clear to his audience here, though, is that when that does occur, when this newness of life emerges, as it grows up, as it's raised up, it's not merely a spiritual life. Now, I have to tell you, there has, in preparation for this sermon series, there was a lot that I was excited to talk about, and there were some parts that I knew were going to be tough for me to talk about, and this was the sermon that I knew was going to be the hardest for some people to hear, because it is a difficult thing for us to come to terms with. First off, we have to come to the realization that as Christians, what we're talking about is actually the resurrection of the dead. We do believe that Jesus, who has died, was raised again to a newness of life, and that through sharing in faith, through our faith, that we share in that resurrection. So we don't just die to our sins, but we are actually raised with Christ and sharing his resurrection to a newness of life. Once we can get to that point where we grasp that thing, then we need to come to this next point and say, what will it look like? How will it be? In what form will that take place? And for Paul, it's clear. It's not a spiritual resurrection. It's a bodily resurrection. It's a resurrection of our heavenly body. The dead will be raised in their heavenly bodies, and these are both heavenly bodies and I should say, what he tells us in verse 40 is that they're both heavenly bodies and they're both earthly bodies. And the heavenly is one thing and the earthly is another thing. But for Paul, it's very clear that how they are raised is they are raised in their heavenly bodies, their glorified bodies. Now, when we talk about a heavenly body, we're not talking about its origin. I'm not trying to say to you that the body that will be raised is one that originates in heaven, but rather, when he talks about a heavenly body, he is talking about the quality of the body. Heavenly refers to the quality of the body, and it is different. This heavenly body is different from our earthly body. And it's different for one very important reason. As Paul notes, this heavenly body is imperishable. This heavenly body is imperishable. And it's at this point where we begin to see how that Christian hope begins to further expand for us. Because we begin to realize the significance of being moved from a place of the earthly to the heavenly. A heavenly body being an imperishable body, this is a body that does not know dishonor. The heavenly body does not know weakness. I know that for a lot of people, it can be difficult to hear that the body that we are raised in will be very much like the body we have and know now. Because some of the most difficult conversations I have with parishioners indirectly deals with their body, the condition that they find themselves in. For some, it may be an illness that their body knows, and it's attacking them physically. And it's like, spiritually, who I am is still very much real, but my body can't be what my mind needs it to be. Some of you, it may be just an injury that has restricted you from being and doing all that you need to be and do. Or maybe for some of you, it's a chemical thing that you're experiencing. You're going, I know what I want to be, but something is firing incorrectly inside of me, causing me to think ways I don't want to think, act ways that I don't want to act. I don't feel like it's me. I understand that it can be difficult to hear that something we're experiencing now could very much be what we know then. But there's hope in the midst of us. Because this heavenly body that is raised is an imperishable body, which means it will not know dishonor and it won't know weakness. Because it's an imperishable body, what it means is that it will be worthy of God's heavenly kingdom. There's hope in that for us. But Paul wants to make a point very clear as well. It is a body. The resurrection of the dead is more than just this ascent of a spirit, and I think that's where we kind of get a little bit frustrated, and I'm going to let you decide for yourself what it is you believe, but this is what Paul is trying to introduce to his audience, is that he's saying there's no detachment where the spirit drifts off into a spiritual realm that exists somewhere behind the veil of this realm. It's not that. It's that who we are is held together. You know, we can look at other examples in Scripture, specifically if we would go back to the Gospels, where there are some stories that are told about Jesus after his resurrection that might be able to give a little bit more of an insight into exactly what this could look like. I'll share one with you from the 24th chapter of Luke. Jesus appears to his disciples, and this is what transpires between them. It says, while they, that being the disciples, while they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them, and he said to them, "Peace be with you." Now they were startled and terrified, and they thought that they were seeing a ghost. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and look at my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish. And he took it, and he ate in their presence. So there's some interesting details in this particular story that bring us to a little bit different understanding of what is going on. Jesus appears in his post-resurrection state. He appears to his disciples, and there's this exchange that takes place between them. They don't really know what to make sense of Jesus as they're experiencing him. And the first thing that he says to them is, "I'm not a ghost. I'm not just a spirit or an apparition or anything else. It is me. Just as you have known me before, here I am before you. Just as you experienced me before, you are experiencing me now. I told the first service this, I'll tell it to you. One of the things that I find very interesting here is that he takes out his hands. And he shows his hands. You know, when I read that, the image of my son's hands come to mind. And the way that my child's hand feels in mine. It feels like unlike anything else, right? Like I know the feel of my child's hand. And the same is true of my wife. When she holds my hand, I know the feel of my wife's hand. It's not like any other hand. I know their hand by their touch. And Jesus says, look at my hand and touch it, and you'll see it is I. And even in that moment, they still struggled to believe. And this is almost comical, but this is true. He says, do you have anything to eat? He wasn't hungry, but he wants to make a point to them. And he asks for them, and they bring this fish to him, and he begins to consume the fish. And while that may seem like just a random detail that's been added into this story, there's a reason he's done that, which is to show to them, I am a real thing. For an immaterial being cannot consume a material thing. Only a material thing consumes that which is material, and he takes in the food and he absorbs it. Anyone ever watched the movie Ghost Dad? No, it's from like 1990, way back, right? I was just a wee little youngster of 8 years old in 1990 when Ghost Dad came out. But there's this scene where the actor who's playing the Ghost Dad, he appears before his children, and he's in the form of a ghost, and they're scared, and he tries to take a cup of water and drink it, but when he drinks the cup of water, it just spills everywhere out on the floor. That's the point that Jesus is making. He's like, look, I am a real thing. An immaterial being cannot consume that which is material. And he takes it in. This is a complicated matter for sure. The Christian hope is so hard for us to grasp, and yet it is ours, and it is expansive. Because the resurrection of the dead, it does not only produce for us the hope that death does not give way to nothingness, it produces the hope that who we are now and what we are now, it matters. And that's what I need for you guys to be able to take and to understand completely. That there's hope even in the midst of this. When we struggle to make sense of and try to understand it as best we can, we get to that point of saying, my brain is hurting, I can't fully comprehend. What I believe we're being led to say is, don't worry about all the mechanics, just know what it means for you. And what it means for you is that there is hope for you now and today. Because your death, you don't have to wait for it. Your death isn't just, it's not just the death that leads to something more. It's something now. Who you are now and what you are now, it matters. It matters to God. It matters desperately to God. Because every bit of you, every fiber of you, every single speck of you, it matters to God. The whole of yourselves will be raised. And I know for some of you, you want to question God on that and say, how can you tell me that this matters? And the response is, it does. Every bit of who you are, every bit of what you are matters to me. And I want all of it. Not just a fraction, not just a portion, not just a slim sliver of it. All of it will be raised with me. Every bit of who you are will be raised with me. All of your heart, all of your mind, all of your soul, all of your body, all of it matters. And that means you matter too. Every bit of you matters. Every weakness, every failure, every ailment, every ache, every pain, it matters. But a day will come, and we can have hope in this, that the day will come, and what we are now will be resurrected, and we will take on the clothes of our heavenly body. And there we will discover the worth that God always intended for us to have and to know as we enter into his kingdom. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.